Hi everybody, this is James. Before we begin, I wanted to make a special announcement. On August 17th at 9 a.m., Andy and I are going to be hosting a walk of the 5280 Trail. As most of you probably know, the 5280 Trail is a proposed loop that goes around the city, prioritizing pedestrians and cyclists. This is going to be a great chance to explore the city, meet other urbanists, see what's proposed and planned for the 5280 Trail, and maybe even get interviewed on our podcast. I'll drop a link to the meetup in the show notes, and we really hope to see you there. Thanks. Enjoy the show. Hello, I'm James Warren.
And I'm Andy Cushion.
And this is the Denver Urbanism Podcast, a podcast on all things city building in the beautiful and visionary city of Denver. I love that music. Cool Guys by Sergio Quadrado from the Free Music Archive. Go download it today. Well, today is a very special day. We are joined by Emily Kleinfelter to discuss in what is hopefully going to be a two-part series about Vision Zero.
The metro area and the suburbs. You know, we want to focus on Denver. That's what this podcast is all about. And yet, I think it's really important to start outward and then work our way into the dense economic engine with very particular conditions that is Denver and the parts of Denver that we know and love very much. At the time of writing the intro for this recording, 33 people had died on Denver's streets. Just today, on Friday, July 12th, you can check it in the Denver Post, a pedestrian died after being hit downtown. That's a crisis. This is a big deal in Denver. But I want to give a sense of the scale for the metro area. According to CDOT traffic data, there have been over 30,000 traffic crashes in the entire metro area this year so far. Denver's actually only about 7,700 crashes, right? So we take it very seriously. We live in this city. It's very upsetting and very sad for us, but we're not the only people who are experiencing this in the metro area. If you cross the street just on the other side of Sheridan, if you're walking on the Lakewood side of Sheridan, you're still experiencing the high injury network, even if you're not in the city and county, perhaps. So we're really excited to be joined by Emily Kleinfelter, who comes to us with a lot of work in the advocacy space and the data analysis space on Vision Zero. Emily Kleinfelter recently joined the city of Littleton as a transportation planner. She was previously the safety/regional Vision Zero planner for the Denver Regional Coalition of Governments, otherwise known as Dr. Cog, which we're going to keep saying throughout this entire episode, Dr. Cog. We wanted to have her on to just do this zoom out, see what is going on in the larger context of the metro area, and see how that kind of influences the toolbox that then we can bring to the city and county of Denver. Welcome, Emily.
Thanks so much for having me.
So talk a little bit about yourself and your current role, and then maybe what your last role was.
Yeah, so currently I'm a transportation planner with the city of Littleton, and I've been there for just over a month now. Previously, I was with Dr. Cog as their first safety regional Vision Zero planner. That was a really exciting role to be there with them because it was the first ever time that they had actually decided to hire a full-time employee focusing on Vision Zero. But before that, I spent about a year at Denver Streets Partnership, and I was a community outreach coordinator there. But I have a lot of experience from state work and local government work to advocacy and even working in the consulting area. So I've kind of run the gamut across like my industry of the transportation planning world and just have lots to say about it.
Well, and also had experience with the very large, as we're talking about today, and the very specific.
Yeah.
But also people experience this as very specific. This is a dangerous intersection in my neighborhood. This is a dangerous street. I'm reading my local news about this dangerous part of town. I think the part we're really excited to just spend a little bit of time with you today, and especially for listeners, you might have heard of Dr. Cog, or if you've read specifically the land use bills that passed this year, all seem to have behind them this sort of shadowy idea of a metropolitan planning organization. Emily has more direct experience with an MPO than maybe we do. So we just kind of wanted to start by asking, like, what is an MPO? And then how do people feel the impact of an MPO? You know, the parts that maybe you saw in your job.
You know, I will say MPOs are kind of different across the country. And so Dr. Cog was actually kind of unique in the way it's formed. So it doesn't just have the MPO, but it's also the regional planning organization and also the area agency on aging. And so we had a lot of different roles that we play there at Dr. Cog. But at Dr. Cog, they didn't just provide land use and transportation funding and oversee sort of the future planning of the region, but they also did a lot of education for the local governments and helping them not just find the funding for improving their communities, but helping them either find the training or the experience so that they could feel more competent, I guess, at doing their jobs.
Yeah. So you mentioned improving their communities. You know, the MPO can exist to help local municipalities give resources and trainings and other things, or at least Dr. Cog can do these things for our local governments to improve themselves. So that comes with it an assumption that like improvement is disentangling car dependency, improving pedestrian and bicycle access. Is that fair to say of the Dr. Cog that it's focused on some of those initiatives, or is it more like a traditional transportation organization where it's like, yeah, we just want to move people no matter how it is, even if that's moving cars very fast and very far?
Right. So Dr. Cog has their Metro Vision, which is the plan for the region, really looking at how do we want to see the region grow, and not just when it comes to transportation, but the health of the region. And when it comes to the economic health, the health of our, environment and our transportation and land use. And so that really sets up the principles for how we want to plan the region. And then when you dig into that, there's the regional transportation plan, and that really sets out the plan for what does the transportation network really want to look like and build out as we see our population grow and change over, the next 50 years. And that guidance is something that helps us identify what are the priorities for the region. And that transportation plan identifies that safety and mobility and connectivity and health are all some of the priorities for the Dr. Cog region. And so those are the things that then guide the different projects and initiatives that they then work on at Dr. Cog.
I like so far that what we have been doing across some of these podcasts is pointing out, certain gaps. For instance, the gap between Ward Station and the city of Golden, or the gap between, a noise ordinance and actually like a safe level of noise pollution. I think part of then really tackling Vision Zero head on identifies like this is real people's like lives and actual money and time lost to traffic crashes. What does then Dr. Cog actually do? Mm-hmm. Like how does Dr. Cog interface with this sort of pressing problem?
Right. Well, when they adopted a regional goal of zero in 2020, the Taking Action on Regional Vision Zero plan, that set out the objectives that they think are going to help get closer to that goal of zero. And under each objective, they list out actionable strategies for them to get there. And so there's a variety of different strategies, right? It can't just be a one-size-fits-all solution. You have to look at all the different influences that we have in our sphere. And so there's data collection and reporting and improving the way that we get our data. There's looking at designing and retrofitting roadways to improve safety. That's one of the objectives. But then there's also the idea around collaboration and education. And so, there's this idea that we want to make sure that there's a full community buy-in for this philosophy of Vision Zero or safety. We want to build that traffic safety culture amongst the region that says, the only acceptable goal is zero on our roadways. And so it's building out collaboration opportunities across our different communities, and it's building opportunities for them to adopt their own Vision Zero plans and local safety action plans. It's not just taking one strategy and going for that. Dr. Cog really has to come at it from a multi-pronged approach. And, they have only one person at this time really working on that. So I would say it is a struggle, right? Like you have to think more comprehensive about that. And so one of the things I think they're doing really well is, there is one staff person focusing on Vision Zero, but it is sort of more ingrained in all of the work that they're doing. So there's other efforts, within the active transportation space or the transit space. When I was there, I was involved in those efforts, making sure that it wasn't just one thing involving safety, but everything we did had safety in mind.
And that's a really great segue. So Vision Zero, this is something people hear about. It's in the news. Like, what actually is it? Is this like an oath everybody takes, like Hippocratic style? Is this a set of engineering practices in a little handbook?
So Vision Zero is really a philosophy that says that zero is truly the only acceptable goal for our serious injuries and fatalities on our roadways. And that is what we should be moving towards. It is a principle or a philosophy in the way, and I guess a goal, right? But safe systems, the safe system approach is really how we're going to get there. And so that's looking at the fact that, again, it's not a one size fits all or just one single approach that's going to get us there. It's understanding that it's safe roadway users, safe speeds, safe roadways, post-crash care, but it's looking at it from all of these different angles and saying we have to attack safety from not just one space, one sphere, but we have to work across all of the different intersections of where safety and transportation can have different stakeholders in play. So it's bringing in our educators, and it's bringing in health professionals and community advocates and people who work in the unhoused space to understand how does that play a role in the fact that we have more pedestrian deaths in some communities. And so really trying to dig deeper and see what's the root cause of a situation here, because a lot of times I feel like we might only be putting a Band-Aid on a solution when we come at it from one angle, wanting to do just an engineering improvement. I mean, don't get me wrong, engineering is absolutely the number one thing that we should be focusing on. But we also have to have concerted effort in other ways that we influence people, whether it's our policies, it's the programs that we have at our work, at our schools, at our community centers that we're involved in, that just kind of continually push forward this message of safety and shared responsibility of safety amongst all roadway users, and that ultimate philosophy that zero is the only acceptable goal. Really, the people in power and the community as a whole have not actually adopted this philosophy of Vision Zero, because we haven't done the full court press of what it really takes to actually commit to being a Vision Zero community. It's more than just a public commitment, and it's more than just putting a plan together. It's following through on a lot of those things, and not just following through for the sake of statistics, of building out a certain number of bike lanes so that you can say you did it, but it's really being thoughtful about the way that you're implementing the different infrastructure or the policies and programs, and how is your community going to respond to it. And I think that there needs to be a little bit more of that effort in the Denver region, at least. And I really am excited to be at the city of Littleton, because we're in this space right now where they are trying to decide if they want to adopt Vision Zero. And frankly, they already are a Vision Zero community. They are doing this work and prioritizing safety at everything that they're doing. But I think a lot of people get caught up on this buzzword of Vision Zero. And at the end of the day, it's that goal of zero traffic fatalities and serious injuries. You can call it whatever you want, but it's also realizing that you can't just say we're a Vision Zero city and that's it. It's what is the real work that it's going to take to get there. And so the city of Littleton right now, with their Transportation Mobility and Advisory Board, which is made up of local folks, they're being really thoughtful about, is this the path we want to go down? Because we've seen it not be successful across the nation. And we don't want to be another one of those stories. And so what are the success stories we've seen, and where is it failing, and why? And really trying to learn from those mistakes. And I think that thoughtful effort behind how do we take on this effort and make sure it doesn't fail is something that's going to set the city of Littleton up for success, and something that I think Denver is going to need to continue to work on. I think they've got a fantastic team that is working on Vision Zero. They are super dedicated and very passionate about it, but it's a bigger political system there than it is at the city of Littleton. The people who are really, really passionate about getting the city safer are unfortunately not always the people who actually have the power to make those decisions. And at the end of the day, too, a lot of those roadways in Denver where we're seeing the most of our serious injury and fatal crashes, that high injury network, a lot of those roadways, the city of Denver doesn't even have full roadway ownership of, right? A lot of these are state highways. And so that means bringing CDOT into the conversation. And that's a whole other ball game of trying to get them to want to make adjustments to some of these roads that they do still, in a lot of ways, prioritize the flow of vehicle traffic over anything.
Yeah, the whole reason suburbs can exist is that we have this interconnected roadway. But having a regional approach, having Littleton be involved and say, hey, we're going to redesign this entire road so that people aren't just coming to Denver and suddenly it's a 4-lane road going into 2 lanes and we have this massive issue and that's actually more dangerous than it was before, just across the border. That's an interesting thing I hadn't thought about before.
Well, so the way I really got involved with Littleton is this fantastic project that they worked on over the past year. It's the Broadway Corridor Study. And the extents of the project start just south of I-25, that interchange project, and they go all the way to Highlands Ranch, basically, in Littleton. So it goes through Denver, Inglewood, little bit of Sheridan, I guess, and then Littleton. And so it's a regional corridor. And if you've traveled along that corridor at all, the context of the land use changes a ton. You've got downtown Inglewood, that main, Broadway is a great little area. But then if you get south, it starts becoming a massive suburban, arterial road that's just not safe for any mode. And so the city of Littleton, instead of just trying to address Broadway in their part of Littleton, this was a DRCOG funded TIP project. They went back and came to DRCOG and said, we want to expand the extent of this project. We want to make it a regional corridor study. And we want to acknowledge the fact that safety, doesn't end at boundaries, that we have to be collaborative with our neighbors and understand how to work together to make sure that these are streets that are safe for every roadway user. And I think that was just such a really great approach. And then I think we have to continue to apply to the rest of these corridors, because you can't just have a really fantastic piece of corridor that then ends at a boundary of another community and they give up there. That's a big, big focus.
Well, and I think that's a really helpful example of kind of a Vision Zero project, right? Not because that necessarily was the Vision Zero team at DRCOG that said, let's do the corridor study, but that's the Vision Zero thinking there. Can you think of any other kind of interventions or projects that you had seen underway, happening at a regional level that really emphasized Vision Zero? I mean, something that 10 years ago looked different than it does now, or is not going to be treated the same way 10 years from now?
Absolutely. I was not as closely involved in this, but the transit work that the DRCOG is supporting, they are looking to build out multiple BRT or bus rapid transit lines across some of these main arterials. That is a huge solution to safety. We have drivers who have a commercial driver's license, which means that they are hopefully a better driver on the roadways than your average driver. And you're taking all of these people who might be distracted or whatever the factors may be behind the wheel, we're taking them out of that equation and we're putting them in a bus. It's a numbers game at that point. The less people that are out driving, we're not able to control the way that they're operating their vehicle, then we are really helping improve the statistics, frankly, for people who are especially outside of a vehicle for their chances of being able to navigate the city safely.
For all my drivers out there, if you want to look at your phone while you're going from place to place, might I suggest the bus? It is a great way to not be driving and look at your phone. Great idea. I'm just saying, if you want to look at your phone and you want to go someplace, there are other ways to do it rather than look at your phone while you're driving, which is now like a misdemeanor of some sort in the state of Colorado, right? That happened this year in Colorado session.
Something like that, yeah. Well, that's an interesting idea. And while you're on your phone, you might want to take a look at a story map that Emily was the project manager for while she was at DRCOG. And we'll drop a link in the show notes so everybody can go check this out. It really is something fantastic to dig through. But can you just lay some context and talk about what this is, why this is, and your thinking approaching this project?
Right. So this story map, and I guess if folks don't know what a story map is, it's really just an online platform for looking at maps, really, and you're able to, put a narrative in there. And so we created the DRCOG Vision Zero plan in 2020, and that had a lot of really fantastic data analysis looking at all of the crashes across the region, but then really taking the crashes and the different area types across the region, because the DRCOG area is more than just Denver. It's 10 counties, it's 58 communities, and so it goes all the way into really rural communities and suburban communities. And so we divided the DRCOG region into 4 area types: urban, suburban, rural, and limited access highways, and then did the crash analysis based on those area types to understand the different trends for those different types of sort of community context, right? Yeah. Because, again, safety is just not a one-size-fits-all solution. And we took the data there and we turned it into a much more digestible tool, really, and by putting it into this story map format. And it allows users to just really explore what are the most sort of prevalent crashes that are happening in these different area types across the region. So, for example, when you look in the urban area types, the number one most prevalent type of crash in our urban communities are pedestrian-involved crashes. So that tells us where we need to be focusing our efforts, right? We need to be making it safer for people to walk in our urban communities. But then when you go and you look at the rural highest number of fatal crashes, the crash type that we see there is roadway departure. So whether it's somebody who is crossing the double yellow line or completely leaving the roadway, that's a much more common crash type that we see on rural roads because of speeds and the type of roadway context, right? It's typically a 2-lane highway with not a lot of barriers or buildings alongside it. Whereas in an urban center, it's much less likely for you to run off the road. And you don't really have pedestrians and bicyclists out in your rural areas as much. And so we don't see those involved. And so that helps us to dig in and say, all right, we can't just say bike lanes on every single street or every single street needs the exact same type of improvement. It's helping us dig in deeper and say, okay, we understand that in our rural roadways, we need to really be focusing on people who are departing from the lane. And so that means whether it's rumble strips or it's signage or it's things to, slow speeds on the roadway, that's the kind of countermeasures we should look at putting on the roadways there. But you wouldn't do that in an urban area or even a suburban area, really. So this story map is just a really useful, digestible way to help people understand what are the most prevalent types of crashes we're seeing in the different area types. And then we give some great examples of different potential countermeasures for each type of crash and ways that they could be, addressed for safety.
And I think what's also really valuable about that effort, right, is we don't want to just endlessly speculate. Well, how do we save people's lives? Let's just keep going back and sort of asking over and over again. It's a toolbox. As you said earlier, there's like 58 communities, you said, that make up Dr. Cog. And so you have small municipalities that are just beginning or municipalities that only have 1 or 2 traffic engineers that work for them.
Some have none.
Some have none. Yeah. Or it's just a private developer built the roadway network and that was sort of approved like 30 years ago and they're continuing to build it out now and we're seeing that it's not serving somebody. People need resources and need understanding. To be able to actually do this work in advance makes then the next round of safety funding that much more targeted and strategic.
Well, so that's great that you say funding because there's a really fantastic grant opportunity out there from the bipartisan infrastructure law called Safe Streets and Roads for All. And it is $1 billion each year for 5 years. And so Dr. Cog obviously was wanting to go after this money. And by Dr. Cog, I really mean me. I was very eager for us to go after this because
Is this on your resume? I got
absolutely.
$1 billion for Dr. Cog. Oh, wow.
Well, so, we saw this as a fantastic opportunity to get a lot of money for the region. And we had, thankfully enough, this regional action plan already in place, which was something that was necessary to go after infrastructure dollars. And so we had the plan in place. And we also, in that plan, identified these regional sort of trends, which allowed us to then, when we sought out and put a sort of a letter of request out to all of our communities and said, do you have projects that would fit this criteria? We already had criteria identified with, this action plan data analysis. And we were able to say, okay, these are the top types of crashes we're seeing in these different, communities across the region. Do you have a project or program or something that is going to address one of these top crash profiles? And if so, we would like to, work with you to include it in our sort of package or bundle of projects that we're going after for federal funding. And we ultimately got 10 partners across the region. We had 4 implementation projects. So these big scale, like infrastructure projects, whether it's we're looking to build some sidewalks in the town of Lyons, do a underpass in Louisville, some really great stuff to improve safety and mobility for people walking and biking. But then we're also hoping to do 14 demonstration projects or some supplemental planning work across the region. The idea behind those is that everybody has to have an evaluation component to their project. They've got to, see if it's actually working, right? And Dr. Cog identified in their Vision Zero action plan the creation of a quick build toolkit. So basically, again, another resource like this story map, right? But another resource they could provide to all the governments in the region that really lays out what are the best types of countermeasures that you can implement quickly for low cost to improve safety. And running a really nice variety of countermeasures that are not just looking at engineering, but also operations like signal timing and programming for safe routes to schools or things like that. So we ideally have all of these projects that hopefully will get funded and then will inform this future toolkit for the region. We have all of these really awesome opportunities right now, and I think so many of the communities in the region are really excited about Vision Zero and want to be a part of it. And it's just, can we get the money for it? And can we actually get this work done in a quick amount of time too? Because, people are dying and we want to get this work built out yesterday.
And to end, what future work is needed? What needs to be done, right? Obviously, getting some bipartisan infrastructure law dollars is always helpful, but what do we need to do, urban setting, suburban setting, rural setting, as a region to hit a true Vision Zero fatalities, zero serious injuries?
Well, at the end of the day, there is only so much we as individuals can do. And even us in the transportation industry, I like to think that there are some big hurdles that we have to still overcome, whether it's, the engineering of some of these major arterials. We need to really rethink the way and completely overhaul them, right? Make them complete streets for all roadway users and reprioritize a lot of our streets for people and not vehicles and the movement of vehicles at a fast pace. But there's also, the policies and the way we are thinking about safety and all spheres of our social life, right? So it means going to your work and saying, what policies do we have in place around everything regarding safety on the roadways? Like if you work in a place that has people driving, what are your policies around safety and driving on the roadway, with your friends? If you drive with your friends, do you have sort of a rule in the car? If you're driving, no phones while driving, seatbelts always on. Family rules, right? What are the rules within your family? What about if you're a religious person or, community centers you go to? All these different spheres that we, are in our social life that we are involved in. We need to think about the ways that we can influence it, whether it's, little small rules within our friend groups or going up into our schools. We need to have curriculum, not just in PE maybe, but I think California has a really fantastic Safe Routes to Schools curriculum where it's in social studies, science, English, and they have all of these different curriculum for their students at all different levels of school to really educate themselves around roadway safety and the way we just design our cities, right? And then building up from there, what are our laws that we have in place, right? What are our state laws? What are our national laws that we have in place around this? But then I guess what I was getting at the very beginning is that I am so optimistic for Vision Zero and have a lot of faith in people. But at the same time, I am so discouraged by the automobile industry. And that is a big hurdle that I don't know how we are going to continue to face. I feel like we've had some really great efforts. There was a bill that was attempted to be passed here, taxing larger vehicles or drivers of larger vehicles, so that money would go to improving bicycle and pedestrian safety in Colorado. But vehicles are getting larger and they're getting heavier. That is a factor in this equation that I don't know how to address in our influence, right? And that's something I guess that I just have to maybe come to terms with, is that that's not my role to play. There are other people who are fighting that battle. My battle is, working on the more local level. How can we design our roadways that are putting people first? And how can we put programs in our communities and policies and educational opportunities for people so that everybody, no matter what their background, where they live, what their age or what their ability is, that they have the opportunity to move safely around their community.
This is why I was excited to spend some time with you going out before coming in. Denver's the older community of the 58, right? Golden as well. Respect for Golden, respect for Boulder. There's older communities, right, in the Front Range here.
Littleton's pretty old.
Littleton as well. There are communities that have had streets, and those streets have evolved over years.
Yeah.
And so we're really talking about our next evolution of our streets. And this time we want the next step for streets to be safety, not to be just constant movement,
Right.
or the best, most unimpeded flow of vehicles. So I think, this is really a small revolution that we're watching take place,
Right.
at levels big and small, from the federal government down to the local government, down to the person who actually is on their street and says, I've lived in this community for 30 years. Why is it that people are dying on this street now? If you're that person and you're wondering about what's happening on your street, get involved. Your advocacy means a lot. You don't have to be downtown for your advocacy to mean a lot in the case of a dangerous road or a road that is intimidating or scary. That's your community, and you deserve to get to weigh in on that too. And you should check out the story map that Emily produced to get some data that then really helps you go to the people who you can speak to with, here's what the actual issue is. Here's what we see. Here's what the issue is. Why haven't you tried this? Why haven't you tried more? The one I love is when you're talking about rural roads, like one of the ones that, when there's a stopped car, like rear end collisions to a stopped car, simply because like you come around corners all the time on rural highways and there's an intersection, like, and you just need to put another sign, 500 feet ahead of the intersection that says there's going to be a stop sign ahead, or there's going to be an intersection ahead. And like, you really need to do that, because if you take those canyon roads, you go up to Idaho Springs or Black Hawk or something like that, like you really just happen upon random intersections that you were not expecting after 20 minutes of just go, 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 go. And that toolbox, it's just amazing in that way to get to see it expressed so clearly.
Yeah. And I just think, to come back to what we were saying of like the revolution, it's going to take time, right? Like revolutions don't happen overnight, really. And this is something that, as much as I really dearly wish that the number was 0 tomorrow, it is going to unfortunately take years for these things to happen. But it's worth the fight, and it's, you've got to have some stamina for it. Think about the fact that, I don't know, 50 or 60 years ago, we had smoking indoors, right? People, like that was the total norm. Yeah. And, it didn't happen overnight that all of a sudden everybody everywhere wasn't smoking indoors and that it wasn't cool to smoke indoors. But now, if you catch somebody smoking indoors, you're like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
I mean, like what? You lit up a cigarette inside? Like, how dare you? Like, and so hopefully we will see a future where people, see a friend get behind the wheel drinking, or see somebody speeding, or, that people, it's uncool to do these things because we have built the system and the environment where that is not the norm anymore. The norm is safety. It's going to take more than a day or two to get there, but we will get there.
And if you're going to spend your career doing anything, saving lives is pretty good.
It's a pretty nice career.
Yeah.
Well, awesome. That's an amazing and encouraging note to end on. Emily, thank you so much for coming on the Denver Urbanism Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It has been an absolute pleasure today.
This has been the Denver Urbanism Podcast, courtesy of longstanding blog Denver Urbanism and our sister blog Denver Infill. You can find more information on the website, denverurbanism.com, and we look forward to your comments and feedback online. Thanks very much. Andy's not a transportation engineer, but he respects the game.